Hello, I am Karen Bryla McNeese, dietitian with the UK Health and Wellness Program. Thank you for joining me today for this session on aging and how the five senses impact nutrition. Now, this may be something that you're curious about for yourself as you age, but this also may be important if you are a caregiver and you notice that a loved one has changes in their nutrition, and it might be worth thinking about how changes in their senses might be impacting how they're eating. So, we're going to talk about what to look for with some of those changes today, and also give you some strategies for how to help in those situations. I think, especially if you are a caregiver, there can be a lot of frustration because you may cook somebody's favorite meal, something they used to love, something you used to bond over and love eating together, and then they're just not interested. And it's easy to feel hurt. It's easy to take that personally. You wonder, what did I do wrong? Sometimes, it's easy to also kind of, deflect it on the other person and they're just being stubborn or difficult. But a lot of times, most of the times, the issue isn't the food at all. Okay. It's how that person's body, or again, maybe your own body, is experiencing the food differently because of changes in your senses as we age. Okay, so why won't they eat? Eating is not just hunger. We have to remember that. It's a sensory experience involving taste, smell, vision, touch, hearing, as well as something called body awareness. I'm going to call this the sixth sense, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. But when all of those sensory systems change with maybe aging or specific conditions like dementia, arthritis, or Parkinson's disease, eating can become confusing, unpleasant, or even feel unsafe or actually be unsafe to somebody. And we're going to talk about more specific examples of that and what to look for. But a loss of general sensory function can lead to some of the things we've already described: frustration during meals, for both you and the person perhaps you're caring for, reduced appetite, which of course leads to less eating, which can, in severe situations, lead to malnutrition, unintended weight loss, which all can lead to poor health outcomes. So, understanding the sensory connection to eating, I think, can reduce stress for caregivers, and improve nutrition for loved ones. I think understanding why something's happening goes a long way to helping the situation. We may not be able to change these things, but if we understand them and what that means for that person and why and how it's impacting their eating, just knowing that can be really helpful and take a lot of the stress and frustration out of it. So, eating, as we've said, is a sensory experience. And when we're eating, our brain is integrating multiple signals at one time. So the brain is evaluating, right? What does this food look like? Does it smell safe? What does it feel like in my mouth? Or what will it feel like in my mouth? Can I chew it? Will I be able to chew it? Can I swallow it? Is it safe to swallow? Okay. And if any of those steps becomes difficult, eating becomes stressful, okay, for that person who has those sensory changes, right? We take this kind of checklist of evaluation questions for granted when we're eating, and it feels very automatic. They're not even necessarily things where we feel like we're consciously thinking about. But to somebody with some of these sensory changes, this is something that they are going to notice, and maybe, again, change their eating in response to. Okay, so let's talk about each of the five senses plus that one extra one that I mentioned. So let's start with taste. Age-related changes to taste include a general loss of taste buds, the need for stronger flavors, and shifts in taste perception. So a lot of times this means there's a reduced salty perception. Somebody may feel like they need more salt on their food to taste the flavor. There may be also a reduced bitter perception. Things that may taste bitter to other people may no longer taste bitter to that person. There's also an increased preference for sweet foods, again, because of that need for stronger flavors. And that's why a lot of people who are aging, and especially people with dementia, we see developing a sweet tooth, even if they never had one before. But again, there's usually concern from a caregiver here of like, oh, geez, my loved one needs more sugar or salt added to their food to eat it. But I'm worried that those things are not good for them to consume too much of, right? So that introduces perhaps a little stress there. Taste can also be affected by medications, right? So let's not overlook that. There's several medications that may cause a metallic or bitter taste to foods. It may cause dry mouth, which is going to change kind of what they can eat and swallow comfortably, and perhaps also just reduced appetite. So always good maybe to check those medications for those types of side effects so you can understand them. And maybe there's some changes that can be made to the timing or dosage of them to help with eating. Smell. Okay. Age-related loss of smell can mean that food tastes bland, appetite decreases, and meals become less enjoyable. And this is because s- about 70 to 80% of what we experience as flavor when we eat comes from smell. So this has a huge impact, right? Now, again, loss of smell can occur naturally with aging, but it's especially common in conditions such as Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease. Vision. Age-related changes to vision may include decreased visual acuity. So again, things may just look blurrier or fuzzier to somebody. A loss of peripheral vision, meaning they can't see things that are out of their direct line of eyesight, and a decreased contrast sensitivity, maybe that things that only vary slightly in shade or color tend to also blur together. It's harder to make out the contrast between them. Older adults may also have cataracts or macular degeneration, which is going to affect vision as well. And this is important with eating because it may be difficult to distinguish food on a plate. Maybe if you served white mashed potatoes on a white plate to somebody with some of these vision changes, they're not going to be able to tell that there's even food on the plate. That's certainly something that could happen. Also, especially in dementia, people may have a hard time processing visual cues, meaning they might not recognize food as food, right? So their brains just aren't registering that this on my plate is food now, okay? And that can, of course, lead to some real confusion and a refusal to eat. Hearing think we don't think about this much in terms of eating. But there is hearing loss that, of course, happens with age, and this can decrease the sensory enjoyment of food. If you think about, when you crunch into an apple or a chip or something like that, or even like if you're slurping your soup or milkshake, those are sounds that add to the enjoyment of food. And once we don't have those sounds, that could take away from the enjoyment. Loss of hearing might also cause social isolation during mealtime. So, for a lot of people who are used to mealtime being a time where you would socialize and talk with people, and that's part of the fun, if you have trouble hearing, okay, you're not going to be able to, enjoy meals as something that's social because you can't take part in the conversation. It can make it difficult to also follow eating instructions. So perhaps there's somebody there with you, right, with that person trying to say, okay, you need to, cut that food or you need to open that container, and maybe you're giving instructions and they may not be able to hear those and follow them. And finally, if they're in a noisy environment, one of the things that happens with aging is that um, all of the noises kind of blend together. So it might be difficult to distinguish like one-on-one conversation noise from background noise, and it all just kind of blends together. So that's something also to keep in mind. Touch and physical comfort. Eating involves multiple types of touch if you think about it. Hand strength for utensils, maybe even just being able to feel a food and pick it up if it's a finger type food and get it to your mouth. The mouth feel of food is a type of touch involved, right? What does it feel like in my mouth? And also just mechanics, the ability to chew that food comfortably, and feel like you can safely do that as well. Um, some challenges with aging may include joint pain, sensitivity to textures in the mouth. Perhaps there's ill-fitting dentures or just dental problems that are making chewing and swallowing difficult. And also, there's normally decreased saliva production as we age, and so it may be that foods need to be a little moister to be able to be comfortably chewed and swallowed. Conditions like arthritis, right, might make it difficult to do very specific things like grip a utensil or cut your food or open certain types of packages or use the utensils like scissors or things that are needed to open packages. Um, okay. And then finally, this bonus sense is called interoceptive awareness. Now, this is really just a fancy way of saying that our body has awareness of internal signals, right, like hunger and thirst that help us regulate our bodies and to survive. Really, they are very strong survival mechanisms. We have to be able to feel our hunger and our thirst. We have to be able to feel like we need to go to the bathroom. These are all sensations that arise within our body. There's many others, right? A lot of times we have that kind of like hit in our stomach that is our intuition telling us something, or we have kind of butterflies because we're nervous or anxious about something. So there's so many cues that our body gives us. Okay. And a lot of these, like I mentioned, are important, especially hunger and thirst, to eating and nutrition. But many older adults do experience reduced hunger cues. Okay. They also have a weakened thirst sensation. So there might be just less eating, less drinking, which could, of course, increase risk for dehydration and malnutrition. There's impaired perception of stomach fullness, meaning that people often feel that they are full sooner than they normally would because they've lost the sense of that fullness. Um, Also, a reduced overall enjoyment of food. Again, if you're not, again, especially with all the other senses as we talked about, how they're impaired and reducing overall enjoyment of food, that's certainly something that can happen. And then increased reliance on external cues to eat. So, because maybe that person can't rely on their hunger and thirst signals like normal, they need to rely on external cues like, oh, it's a certain time on the clock. That means I need to eat, or somebody is telling me it's mealtime. That's when I eat. So just as a caregiver, it's important to understand that they might not be able to use their own cues as well to remind them to eat. Okay, so let's look. I've mentioned some of these, but let's look a little bit more specifically at how some specific conditions might affect eating. So, dementia certainly creates several unique eating challenges. People may simply forget how to use utensils. Um, Picking up the fork. What is this? What do I do with it? Um, Difficulty recognizing food. They might not see food as food. Okay. It might look like something that is inedible to them. Becoming distracted during meals, right? That is quite common. So again, trying to limit distractions at mealtime, we'll see is a key factor here. Paranoia about food being unsafe. I mean, certainly this would be the case if they see something on a plate that they don't recognize as food. That certainly would seem unsafe, but there is just kind of increased paranoia about things being poisoned or contaminated. Forgetting to eat, again, maybe they even have that internal cue still going to eat, telling them they're hungry, but they just forget to. Okay. And then of course a loss of smell, like we've mentioned, is pretty common with dementia. And that's also going to affect their eating. Arthritis, this is going to affect eating primarily through physical limitations, okay? Difficulty gripping utensils or opening food packages, maybe having pain while cutting their food or preparing food. And this can all lead to fatigue during meal preparation or eating. If they've had to do so much work or endure a certain threshold of pain or discomfort while they're prepping food or eating it, they may just stop eating due to that and not because they're actually full. Parkinson's disease, there are certainly motor symptoms here that can affect eating, such as tremors or rigidity, slow movements. This is all going to affect somebody's ability, perhaps, to use utensils to bring the food to their mouth, to chew, swallow their food properly. There's also, swallowing difficulties that do get diagnosed as dysphagia. Which is certainly something you'd want to get some professional help with, typically through a occupational therapist or somebody like that. And then there are some non-motor symptoms with Parkinson's, such as a loss of smell or taste, slowed stomach emptying. So again, another factor that's going to lead to not feeling like they want to eat because it's taking them longer between meals for the stomach to empty and to feel like they want to eat again. And of course, and also constipation again, just from these motor changes of the muscles inside the GI tract. There's some real safety concerns that we want to talk about. Now, a lot of what we're talking about is just a general concern for like how much people are eating and how well they're eating, but there are some real safety concerns with a little bit perhaps more severe consequences that we do want to be aware of. Loss of smell. Somebody may not be able to detect spoiled food, perhaps, right? A lot of us, sniff the milk or the meat or something like that, see if it's still good, if it's edible. If you've lost your smell, you can't do that. Smoke or burning. So if somebody's trying to prepare food, and something's burning on a stove, for example, they won't be able to detect that. Or gas leaks as well if they're using a gas-powered appliance. Swallowing difficulties, so like we said, especially when it is diagnosed as dysphagia, this can increase risk of choking, food aspiration, and pneumonia. Signs of swallowing problems to look out for would include coughing during meals, a lot of throat clearing while eating, food remaining in the mouth, and a wet or gurgly voice after eating. Okay. And if those occur, again, evaluation by a speech language pathologist might be necessary. There might be work with an occupational therapist that might be helpful as well. And finally, this loss of thirst signals, like we said, right? A lot of times there's some concern, but if it gets too severe, there can be actual dehydration, and this can pose some serious consequences, such as a risk of confusion and disorientation, which for anyone as you're aging is not ideal, but certainly if there's dementia involved as well. Also, increased risk of urinary tract infections. That's why older folks are often a lot more prone to these. And also falls, right? Dehydration can affect kind of your like hypostatic tension, right? Like when you get up and how quickly kind of your blood is falling to your feet. And if that's happening very quickly, right, you could get dizzy and fall and of course have unwanted and serious injuries from that as well. Okay, so let's talk about what we can do. All right. So hopefully, like I said, just that beginning part there about what's happening and why and understanding it. Hopefully that's already going a long way to helping people just feel like they have some understanding. Um, Again, maybe for yourself, but maybe for others that you're caring for, and maybe take a little stress out of this, understanding like, hey, this is normal when I'm seeing what my loved one's experiencing. Okay. So hopefully that's already helped. But want to give you a few strategies, right, for each of these concerns that we've talked about that I hope you can use going forward. So, we're going to kind of go through this like we did the senses initially. So, in terms of vision, you certainly want to improve the visual clarity and appeal of food, right? So, high contrast colors, right? Like we talked about that example of putting white mashed potatoes on a white plate. You might want to try to put the white mashed potatoes or white rice on a dark plate so there's contrast and people can see that there's food on the plate and maybe be able to more easily tell what that food is. Or green vegetables, for example, on a white plate. Even just making contrast at the table, perhaps you're using a light plate and you could put a dark placemat underneath it. It makes it obvious that there's a plate here, right? And also, you do generally want to try to avoid busy tablecloths or plates with like lots of patterns and designs. The busy tablecloths can feel visually overwhelming to folks, and again, distract from the food. And plates with patterns or designs, they can do the same thing, but they can also make it more difficult to tell what the food is and recognize the food as food. Improve lighting when it's possible. So ensure there is adequate overhead lighting when somebody's eating. That's going to make it easier to tell what's on the plate and identify the food. Use brighter bulbs if you can, and maybe trying to eat in areas with natural light. We know natural light has a lot of restorative healing properties, and whenever somebody can eat with some natural light, that's a good thing as well. It's separating foods on the plate. So it could be helpful to place foods in distinct sections on a plate, maybe use special divided plates that you can buy, or even maybe just serving one item at a time. Okay. That again is going to be less overwhelming for people who are maybe having any cognitive or visual overwhelm. So we do want to try to simplify the eating experience in general, limit food choices. So instead of presenting a full plate with many items, like I just said, maybe just one at a time or one or two at a time, maybe smaller portions. If you want to serve a few foods at once, smaller portions, so it doesn't look like there's this overwhelming, huge pile of food this person is being presented with. And you can always offer additional foods later. And again, a lot of this is just a change to the routine. This is not how, most of us normally eat or used to eating, but this just might need to be the new normal, that it's a little bit of a process and we serve one thing at a time, right? And okay, if they eat some of this, we get the next thing. Okay. Establish consistent meal routines, right? This is very important, especially with some of the cognitive difficulties, knowing, that someone can expect a meal at a certain time every day. Also, eating in the same location gives familiarity, less overwhelmed that way. Maybe eating with the same people as well. And similar meal structure, right? So if you're going to do the like one food at a time, do that. If you're always going to serve it on a divided plate, do that. But things that are predictable for that person. And serve foods that are easy to identify. So thinking about, sandwiches, fruit slices, roasted vegetables, even raw vegetables, scrambled eggs. Um, these are things that are generally familiar to people and easily identifiable. It's harder to tell what things are when they're mixed dishes like casseroles, stews, stir fries, grain bowls. And that might be overwhelming to somebody, again, to see all these foods mixed together. It might make it harder for them to tell what's in the food. It might make it more likely that they're going to, see something and not be able to tell it's food and feel like, oh, it's not food, or, I'm not supposed to be eating this, and have some of that confusion introduced. So, trying maybe to stick to simple things that that person can identify and understand is food. Make eating physically easier, right? So if there's some, physical limitations, from the touch perspective, using adaptive tools, right? So there are utensils that have larger handles, perhaps if there's trouble, with grip strength or arthritis, things like that. There's weighted utensils if somebody maybe is experiencing tremors or a lot of shaking and having difficulty getting the food from the plate to their mouth. Non-slip plates and bowls. Sometimes, again, if people have some physical limitations, they might feel like they're pushing a plate around a lot to get like food on a fork, and that can be really frustrating because the plate is slipping around. They're not able to get something on their fork or in their spoon. They might be making spills or a mess, and that might be frustrating and embarrassing. So these non-slip plates or bowls are also good to invest in, and also plate guards. So they do make some that have like higher rims and shields around them, so they're less likely to have spills. Serve foods when you can already cut or sliced, right? So if you know somebody has difficulty, cutting up a piece of chicken or fruits and vegetables, whether it's for food prep or when it's actually time to eat, trying to do as much of that as possible or buying foods already in that state. Finger foods. These are going to be things again a lot of times that are easily identifiable as well, like we just talked about sandwiches and wraps, cheese cubes, boiled eggs, mini quiches, chicken strips, meatballs. But again, the benefit of finger foods is that they don't even have to use a utensil. Okay, and if they can use their hand enough to get the food in their mouth, then these kinds of things will work. And sometimes there's just a general frustration, like maybe, they could use the fork, but it's just too much effort. And so that's where these finger foods can really come in handy. Enhance flavor, aroma, and texture, right? So we talked about the importance of, being able to enjoy the flavor of food and how that may be diminished when you can't taste and smell the same, right? Serve warm foods. Warm foods do tend to release more aroma than cold foods. So perhaps instead of that person having cold cereal in the morning, maybe they have like some hot oatmeal that might be more appealing to them. Using more herbs and spices, maybe than has traditionally been used. Again, if that person's taste buds are kind of dulling, maybe introducing some other flavors that aren't just salt or sugar can be helpful, right? Um, Acidic flavors also help bring out the natural flavor of foods. So adding lemon juice to things, or vinegar, or pickled vegetables as a condiment, or even salsa. And using contrasts in flavor, texture, and temperatures can all just create more interest for that person. So serving things that are sweet and salty together, crunchy and creamy, or warm and cool. And minimize mealtime stress, okay? Some of this is just the cognitive load. Some of this is that the noise and the hearing issues we talked about. But reduce background noise when you can. That can just be very overwhelming and unpleasant in general when you're eating. But like we said, if somebody's having difficulty like hearing the mealtime conversation because there's background noise, try to reduce that. Try to reduce loud conversations, perhaps that are happening around that person, if that's possible. And minimizing distractions too. Like we said, when there are distractions, especially if somebody has dementia, it's going to take their attention away from the food and eating. And the next one, so it's a tough one, but allowing plenty of time, okay? And so if you are the person actually there, making sure your loved one eats and bringing them through this mealtime process, it's gonna be a big ask. Nobody feels like they have enough time for anything, but the rushing meals, for folks again that are dealing with those changes in their senses can lead to all kinds of things like we've talked about, including frustration, some real issues with perhaps choking and maybe just premature meal termination. If somebody just feels rushed or frustrated, they're just going to stop eating, even if they would continue eating because they don't want to deal with it anymore. Or again, if it's just uncomfortable to keep eating for a lot of those reasons we discussed, they might just stop early. A few additional strategies to think about. Serving smaller and more frequent meals. So I know a lot of times we're very stuck in this traditional like three meal paradigm in our culture. Um, but especially for older folks, and we've talked about the reasons for this, smaller, more frequent meals may feel less overwhelming and increase intake. Okay. So it's okay, again, to break out of that 3 meal a day paradigm and say, all right, they're having 5 or 6 decent snacks a day, and that is can be the equivalent of 3 meals or 3 light meals for that person. But again, it could be, really helpful in terms of someone not feeling overwhelmed by all these choices and foods on a plate, things like that. Eat together when possible, again, for even again aging people or people with some of those conditions that we mentioned. Eating is very much a social thing for most of us. And so eating with others, seeing others eat also can increase intake. But again, if it's just generally enjoyable, they feel like they're in the company of other people, that can be really soothing and calming for that person at mealtime as well. In terms of that thirst issue and dehydration risk, trying to offer fluids throughout the day, again, remembering that that sense of thirst is diminished as we get older, and some of that interoceptive awareness of recognizing your thirst is diminished too. So, um, again, you might not want to wait for the person to say I'm thirsty or rely on them, being thirsty, just like hunger. They might need these fluids might need to be pushed and offered throughout the day, even if they're not expressing interest in it themselves or initiating wanting to drink something. Encourage participation whenever possible. Everybody wants to feel a sense of dignity and independence, right? No matter what your age or what conditions you're dealing with. So allowing someone to make decisions where you can, right? Like even if it's simple as, do you want the hard-boiled egg or the cheese stick right now? Give them some choice. Okay, that goes a long way for that person. Again, feeling like they're maintaining dignity and independence. And then focus on nourishment, not perfection. I feel like this is probably one of the best pieces of advice I can leave you with. Because I know we all have this idea of what a good diet looks like, perfect diet, really nutritious diet looks like. And it's easy to, of course, when it's a loved one, to want the best for them and strive to, get them the best nutrition possible. But I do think we've got to focus on just nourishment in a lot of different forms, right? In a lot of the ways we talked about. Maybe it's just a bunch of snacks throughout the day, as long as they're fairly nutrient dense and they're willing to eat them, then that's okay, right? Maybe they want to eat all carbs one day and the next day or a few days later, they're willing to eat some fruits and vegetables. Fine. They're making it in there. That's okay, right? So I know it's very easy to stress about these things, right? When it seems like the person is not wanting to kind of follow the traditional rules of how we eat and, all of that, how we eat and when we eat and what we eat. So trying to just be flexible with that and just focus on getting, you know, decent foods, into your loved one. And it doesn't have to look a certain way. And we want to be sure we're being very flexible about that. Because I do think to some degree, some of this stress is self-induced, right? I see that with people with their own diets, right? A lot of the stress they feel about their own diets is very kind of self-inflicted because of the expectations they have of themselves. And I think that can happen as a caregiver as well, maybe even more so when you feel responsible for somebody else and their nutrition, right? So just be very careful of this. Make sure you're staying flexible and realistic. I do appreciate you being here today. I hope this was helpful information to you, and I hope to see you at a future nutrition event. Thank you so much. Bye.